I'll take that as a compliment. You're getting the full unfiltered.
Full unfiltered there.
Yeah.
Is this smooth, creamy, buttery audio?
Yeah,
Or
I'm like, what am I doing with my phone?
is this
using
audio as smooth as a
videos?
cinnamon roll? Or
Yeah.
Should I get into like ASMR content? Is that
Yeah.
the next frontier?
I think that you could do it, man.
I think you should do the.
I was told I could do like bedtime stories,
Yeah.
like stuff that. So talking to the mic. Sorry, I can't quite hear you.
Can you hear me?
Oh.
Maybe it's off. Is it
yeah,
on now?
yeah. Like,
Nope. There. No.
Is it
Sorry,
on now?
that was my
Oh, it's on
bad.
now.
Okay,
No.
there we're in now.
I turned it on.
yep,
Yeah.
like
Yeah. You're good. Okay. Yeah. So probably start around here, but yeah, getting into like, should I do like bedtime stories
Yeah.
that people can like listen to as they're falling asleep?
It's not bad, man. I think honestly, like in real life, if I were to rank our voices, it would be like Justin's, then me, then you. But like right now, it's totally inverted. I feel like. Well, Justin, why don't you?
You think it's like a distancing with headphones or what?
I don't know what it is, man. I think Dan has like some secret sauce in the wiring or something.
Interesting. Yeah, I got the bass boost filter, inline
bass
filter.
Yeah.
Well, Justin's got that like smoky quality to his voice that like, I don't know,
Some drinking
gives-
this whiskey
yeah.
here, right? Literally drinking smoky whiskey.
right?
So you cut that out for the podcast so you could stand out.
Wait, which?
You cut out the smokiness, like you reduced the bass or
The
whatever.
filter.
No, but the smokiness is good. It's like distinguished, right?
turning the filter down or something.
Yeah, I like it.
Voice filter.
I mean, bro, I could literally just sit and pay Justin to talk to me. I've done that before, so.
Did it work out? Did it get good
I mean, I
results?
haven't paid you since,
Yeah.
so.
Seems like an answer. Seems like a response.
Well,
What was this acting class you went to?
Oh, yeah. So I went to an acting class.
sorry,
on-
we're here with Sanath, by the way.
Oh,
Just
yeah,
to
yeah,
level
with
set,
Sanath.
yeah.
Yeah,
Bukuro
yeah.
Boys, welcome back. Acting
back.
class, go.
Acting class.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
course.
My name is Sanath, and I'm a software engineer here in Japan.
Software engineer.
Yes. And I have like a side consulting company. It's called Gadget Software. So that will probably be in some link in some description.
Sure, yeah,
somewhere.
yeah. We'll include in at the top of the description with a link. Send me the link afterwards, but please tell us about this acting class.
Yeah. So I went to a acting class on Tuesday, and I think it was some method called the Meisner or Meisner method or something like that. Don't crucify me, internet. But basically, it's like you are combining three separate pieces. One is relaxation, and like you're relaxing into a chair and basically going limp, and then you're combining that with like babbling or speaking or something like that. And that's supposed to contribute to the relaxation. And then the third thing is supposed to be you're supposed to be keeping like some sort of context in mind. So you're like imagining a cup or imagining a book in your hand or something like that, and you're holding on to the book, and you're just going through this process of relaxing continuously as you're like speaking while you're keeping that context kind of reified in your mind. And all sorts of emotions come up, which is actually what reminded me of an exercise that you had mentioned to me a long time ago, Justin. which-
Okay.
Yeah. Do you already know what the exercise is?
No, actually, I'm interested to hear.
I think you were like, I was daily, I had like timer set daily. And at each timer, you're supposed to bring up an emotion, and you were supposed to stick up
state
with that
scheduling.
emotion.
Yeah, state scheduling. Is
Yeah.
that right? Yeah,
I think so.
Yeah.
And I mean, this is a bit
it's
different.
kind of a magical technique, by the way. I would say.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. This is a bit different because it's not necessarily you're choosing the emotions; you're just allowing them to come up, and then letting them have full expression as you like keep your body and system relaxed. So that's kind of the focus of this technique. But state scheduling was something that I was reminded of when I was doing these exercises.
Yeah, it's a really powerful technique. I mean, I always wanted to try to get back to that at some point. I mean, it is quite intensive, and it certainly makes each day quite a roller coaster because you're like going through these like intense emotional changes over 12 hours or whatever.
Just to level set on what the exercise is, it's basically like throughout the day there's, I believe I did the software side of this, but automated reminders to, go into a certain state, be it deep sadness or like ecstatic happiness.
Right.
So the point of the exercise, correct me if I'm wrong, is basically just to get into the habit of manipulating your own state, basically.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like it is what I would call basically like a magical or even kind of like yoga exercise of trying to bring your maybe unconscious emotional reactions under kind of conscious control just by cycling through them at appointed times, and then once the timing shifts, you just immediately switch back to baseline or switch out of it, right? So so the idea is that you kind of like break the control of I guess conditioned responses or conditioned reactions to things, because again, I think most people throughout their day, they're just sort of very like emotionally reactive to just anything that's happening, like anything that someone says or like something they see on, I don't know, like reels or something, or like some message someone sends them, right? So I think once you start consciously trying to take the reins rather than letting your brain just kind of do whatever it's doing, which is usually pretty reactive or kind of unscheduled or uncoordinated, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. I think you told me when you were doing the exercise too that it's like there's a certain point where your just brain completely tries to resist what you're doing.
Oh yeah, I found it. I found that the brain would very strongly will resist almost all of the changes, but certainly the negative ones, because it's like whoa, like the brain controls when you feel negative, like you don't control it, right? So it's almost like if you try to do it out of schedule or like by your own accord, your brain is like, what? Like, we're not used to like consciously feeling despair, right? Like no one chooses that. Like you're supposed to be running away from that, right? You're not supposed to be like regularly going into that for like, I don't know, 6 minutes or something, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think at first it creates a lot of weird resistances, which I think working through them kind of is the point of the exercise. Just working through them over time, or kind of learning to roll along with them, or kind of like flow through them, I guess.
But so the acting exercise was more along the lines of like letting emotions surface and kind of develop on their own, basically, and kind of voice them.
Yeah, for sure. I mean,
Sorry, talking to the mic just a
Yeah.
bit more. Okay,
Am I-
perfect.
am I-
You gotta
Excellent.
like eat the mic a bit more.
okay,
Yeah.
just a
I'm
bit
gonna
more.
eat you, Mike.
Pretend it's
There
an
we go.
ice cream cone.
So it smells.
Smells like an ice cream cone.
It smells like tin. It's tin ice cream.
Yeah.
Ice cream. Yeah.
We yeah.
So in terms of the
It's unleaded microphone.
yeah, actually, now that it smells just like all those precious moments in New Jersey.
What?
Pure,
Just
pure,
the tin
pure
burning.
unleaded, yeah.
Yeah, pure unleaded gas at the
Unleaded
pump.
fuel, right?
Yeah. Beautiful. Anyways, yeah. So the exercise's value, I think, is learning actually how to deal with. I wouldn't even say deal because I feel like that's the wrong connotation of a word, but allow you to experience your emotions without resistance. And sometimes it can be joy, right? Like, so it's not like it all is negative or something like that. But like a lot of times it can definitely be anger or despair or like hopelessness or like any number of emotions that a human being can experience. So I thought it was interesting because learning how to do it, learning how to experience those emotions from a place of complete relaxation, it changes the nature of the experience, right? So a lot of times when you're feeling like, oh, that resistance to feeling hopelessness or something like that, you just allow it to have its say. Not only are you going to experience kind of like a lot more spaciousness and like relaxation after it has whatever say that it wants, but even during that experience, there's almost a sense of joy of existence that comes up with it.
Well, yeah, like I think a lot of time, like that's the take I would come to is that like if you're like unconsciously experiencing something that you would think you probably don't want to, like if you just looked at the wall and there was like a little character, there was like, I don't know, the Hulk or something, and he was like, it's suffering time or something, right? Like if you're like, you're supposed to be suffering for like the next 13 minutes, then you'd probably just be like, oh, okay, really? Right? Like you probably wouldn't take it as seriously, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Or like, I don't know, like if you went to a therapist or something and he was just like, He's like, "Oh, how's your suffering been recently? Like, are you continuing with the program or something? Right? Like you might maybe look at it a different way,
Yeah.
or something along those lines."
Yeah, for sure.
I had this university professor that was I think kind of the only good teacher I would say I've ever really had in any kind of formal setting. And I think we were reading like like Sartre and like Camus and everything. And we were taking this like really seriously and trying to like, read everything and prepare for it. And on the day when we are gonna go over it, he just like holds up the book and he says like Camus suffers authentically because he's an existentialist. Suffering authentically is a waste of time, isn't it? And he just like throws it behind him. And he's just like moving right along. Right? So he just makes us read this entire book and he just dismisses it in like 3 minutes or something, right? I was like, wow, okay.
Oh man.
Yeah. So that's kind of like something that stuck with me, kind of about that.
Sounds sweet. That's a very Justin. I feel like that's a formative experience for Justin.
Yeah, it was definitely an interesting, formative take on that.
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah, it's interesting. Authentic suffering, right? Like, what is that? Authentic emotion. What is that? It's hard to know sometimes. So, but it reminds me also too, like this exercise that you're talking about is a classic exercise in meditation as well. Especially in Tantrism, or very like probably every sect of meditation has some type of meditation around emotions. And I think the highest form of that is always just like fully embracing it and letting it do whatever.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you've done quite a lot of work with like kind of this. Correct me if I'm wrong. Like kind of like Vajrayana tradition, or like what?
Yeah. I wouldn't say so. I'm not in a Vajrayana tradition, but Vajrayana and then Tantrism from the Hindu standpoint, if you can call it Hinduism, that's like just a blanket term.
Is it authentic Hinduism or is it?
Is there such thing as
Hinduism light?
Hinduism?
Maybe.
So
like I can't believe it's not Hinduism. Just pure beef tallow, right? I can't believe it's not.
Now
So
with
they
50% less attachment and suffering.
50% less attachment, right?
Yeah, even more ideally, right? Like I think that's the best case scenario. So yeah, I have some experience with it. I mean, I have done.
Vajrayana?
Yeah, I have.
So what is that, first of all?
Oh man, it's such a big topic to unpack. But
in a nutshell, so Vipassana is like mindfulness, basically noticing.
It's not what it's actually. I guess just to like get the stereotypes out of the way first, like it has the stereotypes as like the weird Buddhism, right?
It is the weird Buddhism.
Yeah. So it's definitely like the one where it gets into like actual deities and like blood and like monsters and like.
So this is kind of like the what Kabbalah is to Judaism.
A little bit, yeah. I guess you could sort of.
But okay, the mystical kind of
branch and doing kind of transgressive things to like break through obstacles and stuff like that, right?
So the history is huge, right? There's so much that can go into it, but I think probably the easiest way to talk about it is to talk about Buddhism, or Buddhism in particular, because Vajrayana is a Buddhist thing. In terms of like 3 major movements of Buddhism, which is like first
3 vehicles, right?
You have Theravada Buddhism, which is basically it's like the attempt to remove all deities and like from Buddhism and just make the practice the most important thing, and remove kind of like all of the things that might be confusing, like deities or emotions and this kind of thing, and just be like, let's just focus on the absolute basics of practice, and remove rites and rituals, for example, this kind of thing. And then the second movement is Mahayana Buddhism, which is that's like reintegration of deities back into Buddhism after a long stretch of Theravada Buddhism, where people are like, let's not talk about those, let's not add those in. And then adding in a bunch of associated practices. I think like one major one at that time is loving kindness practice being a huge part.
Metta,
right? Being a huge part. And then I think like maybe another side of it is that, okay, we can do all of these things that are a bit more deity oriented, but we have no control over it. Like there's not that kind of level of depth of practice where you feel like you can control the spiritual realm or something like that. And then Vajrayana is like, no, you can, not only does that stuff exist, but you can also like do all sorts of practices that are related to being able to control aspects of the spiritual realm or like these higher order planes that exist.
But I think that's the reason why it's like of interest to occultists, I would say, because it kind of like intersects in that sense where like you can actually interact and do things, and there's kind of like this esoteric side to it through rituals or deities and other practices, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, I mean, the way that Vajrayana probably mostly exported to the West, I mean, there's been more recent teachers that have come over the last, like, I don't know, 70 years or something like that. It's probably Vivekananda, right? So,
Well, yeah. Mr. Raja Yoga, right?
yeah. And he's super famous because, at least I think from the Indian tradition, he's very famous because Vivekananda is an extension of Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, who is a major Kali devotee and was responsible for like a bunch of like super high caliber upasakas or like practitioners emerging and spreading basically
So
Dharma.
he was a guru, basically?
Yeah, you can call him a guru.
Well, a teacher, basically, within Buddhism?
No, he was. So this is separate. Yeah, this is Hinduism.
Hinduism.
specific.
This is
Oh, my bad.
Vivekananda, right?
Sorry.
Yeah.
Just as a side note, yeah, Vivekananda is really popular with like Thelemites because basically his book forms part of the AA curriculum,
Okay.
which is like the kind of like the teaching vessel of Thelema, right?
Okay.
So people are expected to like be doing all that Raja Yoga stuff like really seriously.
Whoa.
And that's kind of like one of the main parts of it.
Cool.
So yeah, Crowley was very big on Vivekananda.
Yeah.
And that's like kind of part of the groundwork of his system even.
Yeah.
So there's definitely that kind of crossover there too.
Yeah, I mean, there's tons of crosstalk too. So part of the reason I bring up Vivekananda is, Buddhism doesn't happen by itself. It happens alongside developments in Hinduism over the ages too. And there's tons of crosstalk, not even Hinduism, Jainism, like all of the religions and all of the practitioners amongst each of these kind of traditions, they're all talking to each other. Like even if you go to some of the older temples in India, like there might have been the Buddhist area and then the Hindu area in certain
I wonder if this is like a class-based division too. If there's like the slightly nicer Buddhist area and then the or something like that, right? If
yeah,
there's,
for
like,
sure. I'm sure
different
that
neighborhoods, yeah.
that stuff was in there. And like there's even like passageways in between certain temples that might be like Buddhist or Hindu, separately. But then like, why is there a passageway that's linking them? It's obviously there was some crosstalk that was happening. There's some kind of like discussions that were happening across kind of religions or mystical traditions. So yeah, when I look at Vajrayana now, I'm looking a lot at kind of like what the mystical side of Hinduism is nowadays. It's like mantra, deities, like let's not just throw desire away or like treat it as though it's this negative thing, but like let's make it part of a person's development and part of their progression through the world. And then similarly, like all other aspects, similar to what Justin was talking about with the transgressive stuff of like, eating poop or like doing these like really weird sexual practices or something.
Like hanging out in the graveyard, right? Or,
Yeah.
hanging out in the
Yeah, for sure, which is something that I think is actually pretty cool and interesting to do. Like all that stuff is great to incorporate as part of practice and like just have a better understanding of life as a whole. As a result. So I have some experience with it, but yeah, Vajrayana it's huge to unpack. I'm sure that if somebody went through what I had talked about before, they would be like, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is weird, this, so there's just so much to discuss about it. And then also, a lot of it is up to interpretation, I think. Like these are things that I've heard from other people who are well established in practice and have done a lot of research, but I'm sure that somebody else has like some primary resource and they're like, oh, actually, it all came from China or something like that, which is totally fine.
Welcome to podcasting where
Yeah.
you
Podcasting,
shoot from the hip
yeah.
into a microphone. That's just kind of what it is.
That's kind of what it is, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of my general background. And as a result, emotional practice is like by far one of the most important things that you can do, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, like it is interesting to see like the overlap with these things because again, people I always like end up meeting a lot of people that are coming at these things from like very different areas of specialization, I guess. Like some people are coming from like a like a Western occultism background. Some people are coming from a Buddhist background. Some people are just coming from a mainstream, I guess, Hinduism background. But I feel like there always do end up being these like weird overlaps. And like we've talked about some pretty, like we talked about like theosophy and things before on here. So
Theosophy. That was the weird New Age precursor.
Yeah. So
right?
I don't think I think very few people at present are maybe super fans of theosophy, but I think I guess you could look at it as an attempt to kind of like create that kind of intersection space as well. Although I'm not sure they did it in a super successful way. But yeah, there are. I think starting maybe in the 19th century, there are these like interesting overlaps of influence and spaces where things overlap.
Yeah. When you're talking about theosophy, can you define that? So what are you talking about?
Oh, just very briefly. I mean, just like Madame Blavatsky kind of stuff.
Is that J.D. Krishnamurti?
Yeah. So
Okay.
she was like his evil stepmother or something. She was the one where like I think she like found him playing on a beach when he was like 5 years old.
Okay.
And she's like, "Hey, like, do you want to be the Messiah?" And he's like, "Okay, right." And then so then he got kind of on the theosophy world teacher track, I think they called him. And then by the time he was like, I don't know, 30 or something, he was like, "Wait, am I being managed?" Right? And so then he kind of just went off on his own track, I guess. I mean, are you familiar with him? Or,
Yeah, I'm familiar with him. I think so. Yeah, I'm super familiar with him.
So he literally got his start as like the little adopted messiah of Madame Blavatsky, who was this 19th century Russian occultist who also invented racism. As weird as that, in a way, like, so she's like, theosophy is where the whole like root races thing comes from.
Okay.
So like, the idea that there's like, like Aryan in like the Nazi sense rather than like the Persian sense. Because originally it means like, Persian, North Indian, right?
Yeah.
Aryan, right? But I can't remember why, but the theosophists came up with this idea that Aryan was like this like Nordic race or something. So that's where all that like,
Nordic
Nazi,
in like the alien sense, or
I think I'm sure there's aliens mixed in there. I can't even remember.
But so the original racism is linked to basically idea of like kind of higher level human.
Yeah.
Races
So the idea that they're like, theosophy definitely went off on the fan fiction tangent with like human races or whatever. So I mean, like a lot of people are still biting that today. It's one of the reasons why I think it was probably more harmful than. I would say probably the harmful ideas outweigh the valuable ideas. I mean, not that I think even Krishnamurti thought there were some valuable ideas, but
in racism,
well, in theosophy, maybe in racism too. I don't know, maybe. But
so you're saying I wasn't born racist? This just happened to me.
I think it was there might have been something there managed behind the scenes, right? Yeah,
I can see it.
Yeah, I'm like really underread in like what Krishnamurti actually ended up thinking or believing. Like I know his background because I just through the theosophy background, but like I don't know what direction he ended up going in.
Yeah, it's been a long time since I've read his books.
Yeah,
but like generally it's very formless meditation kind of stuff.
Okay,
right?
yeah.
And
it's just kind of like non-dualism.
Yeah,
kind of stuff,
I think
like,
so.
Yeah.
And I like that stuff. Don't get me wrong. I think it's actually like it is a great. That's like where practice needs to move, I think, inevitably for most people, if not everybody who wants to engage deeply in a meditation practice.
Right.
But I also just think it's completely unapproachable for the average person.
Unapproachable in what way?
Like I don't know, when you start talking about like the formless realms and like subjective states and stuff, that's not very tangible for most people, right? So,
right.
But if you are talking about like, well, not just like the principle or like this kind of like subjective experience, but you're talking about, I don't know, deities and like what they're holding or like how beautiful they are. And you can see how beautiful they are because they have like an image that you can see and you have a history and a story that's attached to them. Right. I feel like that stuff's a lot easier to start with than just immediately moving into non-dualism.
I think people want deities and something to immediately work with. It's a little bit more approachable.
Yeah.
I guess, yeah.
For
Have
sure.
you heard of E0030 Krishnamurti?
Yeah, isn't he like the evil?
the evil Krishnamurti,
He's the evil
right? He's like the evil. I don't think he actually is related to JG, or Jiddu, right? But yeah, I've read some of Yuji's books too, and they're definitely amusing. I'm gonna say. I don't know if you read anything about him. Or...
I watched a video from him because one of my friends got really into him.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he was like, "Oh,
that's interesting itself." I'm like, what kind of person would like get into UG? Because
yeah,
I don't know. It's pretty funny. Funny takes on a lot of things.
He gets like super like irritated when he's talking and stuff, right? Yeah, it's a good question. I think somebody who's like their spiritual practice is pushed forward by malice and spite generally would be intrigued by UG Krishnamurti.
I think he like, if I remember right, he like put out a cookbook or something. Like they're asking like, what's your final teaching? And he's like, cooking with butter and cream or something. Like he came out with like a cookbook or something. And there's just this other, I guess, quasi guru who
contemporary.
Well, contemporary-ish, like 20th century. And coincidentally shares the same name as Jiddu Krishnamurti.
Just through pure coincidence.
I think it's just a pure coincidence. But he's very much like the evil version of him, where he like just kind of like trolls everything, and he's like, nah, there's nothing to learn. Like you can't really like attain anything, and gurus are just wasting your time, taking your money. Oh, by the way, give me some money, right? Right? He's like not taking it too. I don't know. Yeah, interesting take. I know some people that take him really seriously, and then also some people that really don't like him.
Yeah,
because they think he's like evil or something. But which I guess I never could take him that seriously. But I would say certainly interesting take, I guess.
Yeah,
but, yeah.
I mean, I think it's important that all perspectives and kind of like you quote unquote spirituality are available for people, right?
Right. Yeah.
I mean, I think part of why India is so famous is because it allowed for like pretty crazy levels of freedom of thought.
Yeah.
In terms of spirituality, and a lot of it was like clearly wrong. When you look back on it, you're like, no, actually, that makes no sense considering what we've seen over the last 1,000 years or something.
Yeah.
But many times, like, just even being able to venture out and just being like, there is no God, or there is a God, and that being like the transgressive thing is, it makes it more approachable for people to actually engage, right? Even if you feel like even if you feel like an outsider, because there's so much available perspective in the space. So
yeah, actually I have heard Buddhism described as Vedantic Satanism, because it's kind of like Anatman is saying there's no God, kind of.
Yeah.
Or there's no soul or anything. So it's almost like I guess you could look at it that way. I don't know I think that's probably neglecting the finer points of it, but still kind of an interesting way to look at it.
Yeah. Once you unpack it, it's like it becomes so textured and so much more interesting. But I think allowing for all of these kinds of diverse perspectives and allowing them to be as transgressive or uncomfortable as they are allows for so much more discussion and tangibility for people to jump into.
Right, yeah.
So all in all, a good thing. But it's interesting because like a lot of times you'll hear arguments from spiritual people and you'll just be like, aren't you guys just like talking about the same shit, basically?
Yeah.
There is a soul, and it's like, there is only one soul. It's like, well, if you just walk those back far enough, it just ends up being the same argument, essentially.
Semantics, basically, right?
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I mean, like, I do think there are like actual doctrinal disputes, I guess. Like, I think there are things where people actually probably would pretty strongly disagree, but there certainly are. At the same time, I think there's like more intersections maybe than would first be apparent.
Yeah.
So I think that intersection space is quite interesting too.
It's very large, but I think the places where the doctrines differ, they tend to be. I mean, it just depends on what you're talking about, but my sense is it just has to do with like, all right, well, what are you trying to do with your practice, basically, right? So it's more like if you take the practitioner's standpoint of like, okay, this is what works for me and this is what doesn't at this time period for what I'm currently trying to accomplish or what currently feels right for me to do, then that tends to resolve a lot of the disputes, right? Because it's like, well, when I look at it, it's like, well, mantras work, mantras don't work, or visualization is key, or that's a waste of time. Just like completely
Sigils
let
or
go.
other stuff, right?
Yeah,
there's a lot of
yeah.
things, right?
Or like
Yeah.
ignore the deities, or deities are there, or God doesn't exist, or God exists. It's like, well, what helps you the most with what you're trying to accomplish?
Yeah, it's a good way to look at it. It's almost kind of like a chaos magic perspective where they're just like, yeah, whatever is of use, or like whatever is going to get you where you're trying to go, right?
Yeah,
it's
for
kind of
sure.
like some way of looking at it.
I mean, that seems to be the most kind of pragmatic approach to things, because I guess as we were discussing, a few hours ago in the chat, what'd you call it? Epicurean uncertainty.
Epistemological
There we go.
uncertainty.
Yeah. Sorry, epistemological uncertainty.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, if fundamentally you can't really know what the truth is, right?
Yeah.
Then,
That gets into like very Greek philosophy areas where they're like, how can we know that we can't know anything or something? Right. Like,
yeah.
I guess a bit, I guess that's a bit of a rabbit hole too, but yeah, at a very basic level, I mean, that kind of is the case, right?
Mm.
It's like, if your future self traveled back in time and was like, oh no, like you just got to become a baker. Like your destiny is actually, in the kitchen with yeast, right?
Right.
Like, would you believe yourself, right?
How cool is that future self? You know what I'm saying?
See, dripped out.
Yeah. Is he
But
like,
would you? But even if he was
Slagging.
cool, when you think he might be lying for some reason, like, would you believe that?
Yeah, I
You
mean,
know what I mean?
how would you how would you even know it's your future self and not something masquerading as it?
Well,
I
that's
guess,
sort of the
right?
thing,
Like,
right? So, like, even if, let's say you were like, yeah, like, nah, like, I hate baking and pastries, and then he came back and said that,
mhm.
like, it's like, would you believe him, right? Right?
Yeah.
And he's like, no, I'm trying to save you all the hard work that comes with that it took me to finally get on the proper path.
Right.
Right. He's like, no, you'll save yourself like 20 years of, wasted, futile effort. It's like, are you going to believe him? Right. I mean,
yeah.
he might just be trying to trick you into the evil timeline or something, right?
oh, like evil future self?
Yeah.
I mean,
like,
I would try it.
Would you believe? Yeah.
But I mean, how would you even know it's like future you, right?
Well, let's
Like,
say he comes back. Let's say he just appears in your room.
Right.
And he's like, oh, and he looks like you, right? And he's
Okay,
like,
well, it's an alien masquerading.
Okay,
as,
yeah,
like
yeah,
it's wearing
yeah.
your skin or whatever,
Yeah.
right? Like,
But what if it feels very nice?
yeah, I
it's
mean,
like-
then you should follow it, I guess,
Yeah.
right? I
Okay,
mean,
yeah.
well, yeah. So, like, well, I was kind of like, in terms of truth and knowledge, like, okay, well, can you follow your heart, right? Is that like actually a guiding thing that is possible to, or is that just another arbitrary sort of perceptual thing that doesn't necessarily point to the truth either, right?
Yeah, I think it's it's an interesting way of phrasing again what I would consider like very, I guess, like thelemic questions. But again, you could look at them as like Hinduism as well, which is like, yeah, if your future self or your true self appeared to you and started telling you stuff, like, would you even take them seriously? Right? And I think for a lot of people, like, they probably wouldn't, because they'd be like, oh, but like, fuck being a baker, or like, I don't even like pastry, right? They might think it's like some evil timeline version, or like alien in disguise. There's just a lot of reasons why you maybe wouldn't actually.
I mean, I don't know what my future self would need to like say to me like instantly get me fully on board with their agenda. I mean, there'd be the shock of, that weird encounter immediately. I mean, once they leave, like, what could they have possibly said that would make that kind of, belief in them persist? Right? I mean, they could start going into, nitty gritty kind of like memories and, details of your childhood or something that no one ever knew, and maybe like you barely remembered until they like brought it up and proved that means that they're your future you. But I don't know, it's still very abstract, and like how do you trust that, right?
I think it's a relationship thing, right? So it's like, how do you get to know somebody that you don't know before? In this case, maybe the 20-year-old or like 20-year in the future self just vanishes immediately and you never see them again. You're like, okay, I just have to like see if this is like real or not. But if like you're in continual communication with them, it's like, well, you listen to what they say, like you see if they're kind of like walking the walk, talking the talk. you try out maybe some of the stuff in like small doses. That's pretty risk free.
Yeah.
And then if it works, you just keep going with it, right? I mean, you can always say like, oh, that's just like longer term gaslighting of a demon in disguise or something like that,
right?
Which is totally possible. But I don't like the general sense that I get is it's very rare that an evil being has extremely long-term kind of like
commitment to
like
it's like the evil genius. It's like focus.
He's like, this is a 90-year game plan.
It's a 90-year game plan.
It's usually they just want to take your soul like immediately or something, right?
Yeah.
That's why like when you feel the alarm, even just around a regular person, like we can remove the you know, like spirit aspect. It's like you can feel immediately, oh, this person like wants something from me.
Have you ever heard of this book called The Screw Tape Letters?
No.
By C.S. Lewis, who's the Narnia guy.
Yeah.
So he also wrote and again he's coming from a pretty like Christian perspective, but it's still a good book, like interesting. He wrote this book where that's exactly what the premise is that it's like a management seminar for demons where like one of them is like one of the managers is like writing to like one of the, you know, newbies. And he's like, you know, look, here's your 5-year plan to get this guy's soul. First, you got to lead him in this direction. Then you got to get him interested in this person. Then you got to do this. Then he just like lays out, you know, like ways that it's going to like fuck up this guy's life and like get him to, you know, like associate with the wrong people, stop meeting these people, start doing this, get interested in this, start reading. And he just like lays out, you know, point by point. And then it's like a series of like progress updates as like, you know, it starts getting put into practice. And, you know, the guy starts like, you know, fucking up his life and meeting the wrong people and, you know, like taking all of what the demon is saying seriously. And kind of just trying to like nudge him in the right direction. And he's like, yeah, good. You're almost there. I just got to get him to go this. And then, you know, it's definitely worthwhile, book to read.
I should check it. Is there any point where the demon like fails? It's like, oh, sorry, like I really tried to get him to do this thing.
Yeah, I think it in the end, I think it eventually is like one of them. I can't remember the main plot, but I think he does like eventually like fail or something. Then he gets like horribly, you know, punished or cannibalized or whatever for not, you know, successfully stealing this guy's soul or whatever, right? Because
you had one job.
Yeah, it's like you had one job, right? And then fucked it up. So it's the end of you, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's highly relatable though, right? It's like, oh, yo, like how many times have you been at a crossroad where you kind of had to make a decision and, you know, one of the decisions kind of was like a little bit selling yourself out in some way. And then the other one was like, well, it's harder, but it's like more aligned in some way. Or
more aligned with your will, I guess.
Yeah.
What you should actually be kind of doing, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And like I've been there countless times.
Yeah, me too, right? Certainly.
Well, every day, I think, right? You meet that crossroads.
Yeah. I mean, some situations certainly have that. There's definitely more like crossroads situations sometimes.
Yeah.
Where you're like, I gotta make a hard decision and kind of sucks, but yeah, like
it's tough.
Which way, right? Yeah.
It's tough, yeah, for sure. I think like one of the probably most relatable one for dudes is like romantically, you know, like figuring out like who should stay in your life long term versus not, and like helping them go on their way, you know, if not.
That never gets any easier.
It's hard. Yeah, it's always hard.
It never gets any easier. Yeah.
It's always hard, you know. But like I think when you see the negative side enough times where you like overstayed something or like you went down a path that you weren't, you like recognize just.
Yeah, and I think the longer you stay on the wrong path, like the harder it, like you always think you're going to be like pushing it, kicking it down the road or something, but I think the longer you stay in the wrong path, like it kind of does get harder and harder to eventually, you know, correct course or whatever.
Do you think that you can just sell your soul at a certain point and it's just like there's no coming out of that hole?
Certainly, man. Yeah, I mean, I think while you're alive, I guess there's always a chance, but like I think you can, and again, I'm using, like, I recognize that not everyone has this, like, you know, true will perspective or whatever, but I guess you could say, you know, like sort of, yeah, your soul or your fate or your right action, I guess, you know, whatever you want to call it. But I think there's definitely points where you can kind of like give it up or like certainly sideline it in favor of something else. And, you know, that might be someone else's agenda, might be a societal agenda, might be well, all kinds of things, right? Could just be laziness too, right? Could just be you're too lazy to actually do the hard grind, I guess, right? So I think there's that element of it too, I would say.
Yeah, I think Dan's kind of like spot on too, where it's like it's an everyday kind of thing too. If you do it every day, then like when it comes to the bigger crossroads that you end up at, it's like making that decision's a lot easier because
it's easier. You kind of have some base to fall back on.
Yes, some momentum alongside that route. So yeah, I mean, dude, it's like the constant struggle of like falling into the abyss versus like making a real life for yourself.
Yeah. Or taking a concentrated leap into the abyss when you sort of know what you're doing.
Yeah.
I guess you can't ever really.
But if you know how to swim a little bit, right?
If you can swim a little bit, maybe you got some prep for it.
We've seen many uneducated people make that jump into a deep abyss and like just never come out of
it. Yeah. Unfortunately, it's very real.
In all sorts of ways too, like with money or like starting a business. I've seen it with friends.
Yeah.
All sorts of like.
That's just like stupid life decisions. Certainly, there's no shortage of those too. People just end up fucking themselves over, sometimes for seemingly dumb reasons.
Yeah,
but
makes no sense, right?
Yeah.
It's weird, I mean, you can be like deluded into thinking that it's your true will to do something catastrophic, right?
So it's so hard, man. I think that's the real difficulty is like, what is it? Like, what am I supposed to be doing?
Right, yeah.
Like, what should I be prioritizing?
Well, yeah, and like, what is your primary method of orienting towards that? Like, do you listen to your heart? Is that the thing? Or, do you left brain like plan and intellectualize and reason.
Come out with a spreadsheet and
wow, that just brought back this memory. I have a friend from elementary school
who's using a spreadsheet.
Exactly.
For what? For what?
Everything. Like he spreadsheeted out his whole life. This was back in university. He had this, even like late high school, he had a spreadsheet going. Can't remember how he was using it. I don't know. Guess his family background just for funsies.
He's Indian.
Quaker?
No.
Mormon?
No.
I was gonna say Mormon too. Yeah.
Jinx.
Spreadsheets. Come on.
Spreadsheets.
I thought it was
Chinese.
obvious. No. But yeah, German in this case.
Okay.
Yeah.
It makes sense too. Yeah.
I mean, it would have made more sense if you're like, he speeds on the highway every day.
Did it work out for him, or like did it?
Haven't checked in with him too. Seems to be doing well though. I mean, I don't know. Unfortunately, some there's been some distance due to having moved to Tokyo and whatnot.
Maybe that's how he communicates with God though. Is like through the access of Microsoft Excel. Every time he types in one of those formulas,
it's like the holy diagram.
That he can feel.
And just to be clear, like I don't know if I started this line of thinking as a question, like, well, what do you listen to, right? Like, because you can go down any of these paths, and they're all kind of prone to their own folly, I guess. I mean, reasoning certainly, like, you can think yourself into a corner pretty easily. And that
I would say that like reason, I feel like reason is probably the one that's like most clearly like prone to be like illusion or something. Like, I think reason is probably the one that's most error prone immediately. Because like at the end of the day, we were kind of talking about this before we started. Like we were saying, I mean, you were giving examples of like, kind of like, people starting companies, even though on paper it maybe isn't the best idea, or like, people doing like, startup kind of stuff where maybe, again, there's no guarantee of success. But so again, if they sat there and reasoned that out, they'd probably be like, well, yeah, I'm just not going to do this, right? But at the same time, like, is doing what they did really their will? Well, I think, again, only they can answer that. But they probably did reach a point where they're like, well, yeah, I mean, it has to be like, doesn't really make sense, but, right? There's some, so yeah, I mean, I want to say like, I guess like your heart or kind of your gut is maybe the final arbiter, final judge, I guess. Probably more than reason, because again, other than maybe the German spreadsheet, dude, like I don't know how many people at the end of the day are like actually that motivated by anything too reasonable, right? Like I think most people's motivations are
Disney based programming. No.
Well, I just mean like they're more maybe like primal motivations or primal concerns that maybe wouldn't make as much sense on paper.
Yeah,
right. But I don't know. But,
I mean, why not just use them all, right? So it's like use reasoning, use your heart, use conversations.
You should.
You know, like just do everything to try to get that alignment, I guess.
Yeah. And what dictates your alignment? How do you find the balance? What is the thing what is the perception that balances those?
Well, those are kind of, I think that's kind of like that gets into like tarot stuff. Like that's kind of the tarot journey, is like balancing the magical weapons, you know, like the sword for reason, the wand for will, the cups for, you know, emotions, and then the discs for, you know, just practical concerns, I guess, like the spreadsheet or something. You know, I guess it would probably fall under that, or maybe the sword. I don't know.
True magician must wield all
four, right? Yeah. Is the magus who has all four, right? So,
it's an experience thing too, though. I think you just try shit, and then if it doesn't work, you're like, oh, maybe it's something else, and you keep doing that until you have like a good arsenal of tools at your disposal. But I mean, for me in particular, I think that the only aligning force in all of it is kind of like a relationship to God, basically.
Yeah.
You know, which is probably like pretty heavy to say, I think, on the internet nowadays. But I think unless you have something that's greater than just your kind of like, even your beyond your egoic self, like beyond the body, beyond kind of like maybe like some higher self motivations that you have, which are still in some way egoic, like there needs to be something beyond that kind of aligns the entire system in a way that's cohesive.
Well, yeah, certainly. I mean, I always just term it like religious concerns, I guess. And I know a lot of people are like, oh, I would rather say spiritual rather than religious. But I'm almost like the opposite, because I'm like, well, then what does that even mean, right? Like if you have, like, I kind of do believe that in practice, like everyone does have religious concerns, but they're going to have to define that in a way for them, you know, they're going to have to pick what they are.
Yeah.
So yeah, kind of coming down to the same thing. I'd say.
I think the other side of that too, and maybe it's not where you're edging at, but it just brings us to mind, is like God has like a personality. That's like a facet, right? It's not just like this completely abstract universality where it's like you interact and the universe is a complete mirror. It's like maybe that's one aspect of how reality works, but there's also like very clear personality aspects that emerge that are extremely human and human relationship like in nature, right?
Yeah.
You know,
I'm hesitant to agree with that, because I mean, if I were to define God, it would be that formless kind of energy, right?
This is one of the things where that's one of the takes where it's like a reservoir. You see what it, so that's like the take
the take of God as like a reservoir of like life energy, basically.
Well, just like a reservoir of like all energy, right? So like that's sort of what
like the abyss from which everything emerges.
Well, yeah. So and again, like I think like Kabbalah kind of tries to reconcile these approaches. So I guess like the Kabbalistic take I would maybe say is that the personality aspects are very real, but they're contained within kind of like a contraction of the reservoir or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm struggling to map that onto anything.
In Hebrew, I think it's called tzimtzum or something, which means like a folding or a contraction.
Okay.
Well, okay. So
so I mean, like we're contractions of God, right?
Well, yeah. So I guess like the problem that they're trying to solve with this is that if you have an infinite reservoir of infinity, then like how do you end up with like individual management consultants or something? Much less gods, right? Much less personal gods, right?
For sure.
Like how are you ending up with these like limited assholes around us? much less like, I don't know, Kali or something.
Yeah,
right? Like,
deities.
how are you ending up with, the obviously pretty material? So again, you can pretend that like, well, I don't know, pretend, but you can be like, oh, well, like, actually there is no matter, it's just an illusion, right? But then you're like, still, well, like, I still have to eat and still have to like, do things, right?
Or you can say that Tanaka-san, the management consultant, is also, God too.
Well, sure. But I think that's part of the reconciliation idea here too, is that like Tanaka-san is like a very heavy part of God that required extensive folding and, extensive production processes to arrive at. So I think you could look at the tree of life as being like almost like a factory that creates Tanaka-san out of infinite God reservoir, which again is presumably almost like just nothing, right?
Yeah.
It's like infinity, absolute nothingness almost, right? So in order to arrive at the very specific and annoying Tanaka, you have to go through a lot of contortions through various, sephira and other complicated things to arrive at. So that's an interesting take, is that it's not that like material existence or Malkut, as they call it, is it's not that it's like some evil fallen world. It's actually a very sophisticated production out of the original reservoir, right? So even things that seem kind of like shitty and annoying are actually like highly specialized, insanely complicated spiritual productions that were probably pretty hard to arrive at. Right. So it actually gets more differentiated and complex as it descends rather than as it ascends. And in some ways, as it ascends, it actually gets simpler, right? So it's not that it gets more sophisticated. It actually kind of gets like simpler,
right?
Like the upper triad is supposed to be almost like impossible to visualize, right? Like Hokma and Bina and Keter, like you're not really like supposed to like really see much there, I guess. It's just kind of like
pretty formless.
Beyond, it's pretty beyond I don't know, identity, I guess, or something like that. So that's one way of, I guess, like reconciling them.
Yeah.
I think that with a grain of salt. I don't know if that's true or not. It could be.
Yeah. I think the whole podcast is this could be true.
It could be true.
Food for thought.
Yeah. But I think the way that the Buddhists talk about it is the formless and form are one and the same. They are not separate from each other. Yeah. And so that being a primary teaching there, I feel like is very indicative of like, well, our day-to-day experience of like materialist kind of object related world is just as much divine as the formless realms are.
Yeah.
Our relationships with other people, friend, mother, father, son, daughter, cousin, like those are just as divine with God, and their expressions through God as they are with our actual relatives.
Right. Yeah.
So
I get kind of like, I feel like that's kind of like a Zen take too, or like, was it like the Chan Buddhism, like the Chinese Bodhidharma Buddhism? I feel like it's a little bit on that line too. I always have interesting thoughts on that too, about where that fits in, like where that tradition kind of fits in.
Yeah, I mean, we're probably most heavily influenced by that here in Japan too, right?
But I guess just because it's like a tradition filled with like entertaining maniacs that did amusing things and
ask themselves weird questions,
cut people's arms off, and cut cats in half, and did very strange things to try to awaken people, I guess.
Yeah, I feel like the Zen tradition in general, the Chan Buddhist tradition, is like the scariest tradition because it's like literally the most maniacal, like pain-loving, like mind-destroying people in all of the traditions. Like when I look at, Hinduism and like mantra sadhana or something like that, I'm like, okay, like, and there's a system and it's like easy pace, but like Zen was just like, no, go there now or we're going to beat the shit out of you. Or like, here's this question that you contemplate and can't answer for like months at a time. It's like, what the fuck?
Yeah, there's a lot of amusing like legends about Bodhidharma and who he actually was and what he actually did.
This is the founder of Zen.
Yeah, in a very
roundabout way.
In a roundabout way. So it was originally a form of. He originally taught it in China, where it's called Chan Buddhism.
Okay.
And then it was exported to Korea and Japan. But so Bodhidharma, I think, was supposed to be in Persian because they always call him like the red bearded Persian.
Wow.
And they're describing him as if he's some kind of like hideous non-Chinese entity that emerged from somewhere, right? He's hairy and he has like colored hair and he's got wild eyes and he's like clearly not Chinese, right? Yeah. So right away he's this kind of strange, I don't know, like abominable snowman kind of teacher that's is camping out in a cave and
in China.
And so he went to China, he camped out in the cave and stared at the wall for like 10 years or something, and I think he was getting ready to fall asleep, so he cut off his eyelids so he could keep staring at the wall and keep meditating, right?
That's the origination of tea, by the way.
Yeah, and then I think the guy that became the second patriarch kind of came in and entered the cave and tried to get some instruction, and Bodhidharma didn't take him seriously, so the Chinese guy cut off his arm and was like, "Can you take me seriously, senpai?" Right? Notice me, senpai. And then finally started teaching him, and then he allegedly created Shaolin Kung Fu for the monks to use as well. I don't know, like just there's a lot of these like amusing kind of legends and stories about him.
I mean, it must have been a real person, right?
Yeah, I'm sure he's a real person of some kind.
Or maybe multiple people.
Maybe.
Yeah.
But
and so what? When did it become Zen? Did it?
Oh, that's just the Japanese reading of the
same
characters.
Chen.
Yeah,
okay,
Chan, I think
Chan.
is.
Okay.
I think people from Japan went to China.
Yeah, or Korea. I think they might have. Yeah. I think they might have picked it up in Korea originally, like Dogen and everything. We should ask Brandon about this. Brandon, our friend Brandon, who we might have on the podcast at some point. He spent a lot of time in Engakuji, like the Zen temple down in...
I've been there.
Oh, you've been there too?
Yeah.
Have you sat with the monks? Or?
I mean, no, not
so
like
much,
that.
Yeah. You spent a lot of time learning from them and kind of sitting with them, so could maybe ask him that if he gets on. But so I think they picked it up in Korea originally, and then made its way to Japan. Yeah.
Yeah, man. You should definitely have him on because he probably has a bunch of esoteric knowledge that's not really available.
I think he does. Yeah. And he's quite deep into. I'm actually going to meet him tomorrow, but I don't think he's going to make it because I think you're away.
Yeah,
tomorrow.
I'm away.
Yeah. But yeah, he's definitely put a lot of time into Zazen and wrestling with koans and trying to figure out all this stuff. So I'd be interested to hear more.
It's surprising.
Yeah.
I mean, you've been doing this stuff for a long time with the Western occultist kind of tradition. Yeah. And it's like, I feel like every time I dive in deeper, like more stuff just like shows up and I'm like, whoa, I didn't know this existed.
Yeah, it's sort of how it goes.
Yeah, it's crazy.
How it goes,
and it's like nonstop. It's like, whoa, this exists too. And it's like, oh, I understand how these are connected or how the system is put together, or I can see how this like changes experience in this kind of way or something. And it's like endlessly fascinating. It's
wild, man. Yeah, it's a real deep dive, and I think that most people that do deep dive with this kind of stuff, I mean, it turns into kind of a lifelong thing, and they realize they're kind of like never really at the bottom of it. There's always like more to kind of investigate or
so cool
try out or pick up, I guess. Yeah,
cool. Should we end there today?
Yeah, we can wrap it up.
How are we doing for time?
We're just at about an hour, so we'll do a few more minutes.
Yeah.
Well, probably just in conclusion, I guess. Did you want to talk? You started mentioning you're a software engineer. I wasn't sure if you wanted to plug anything.
I don't know if anybody cares at this point after an hour of like.
They might.
Care.
Yeah, they might. I mean, might as well plug in case someone found anything. I'm not sure what you're trying to promote, basically, but
for sure,
the floor is yours.
Yeah. So basically, this year I'm like doing a lot more content. I wasn't expecting necessarily to do a discussion about occultist stuff with Justin and Dan today, but it's hard not to, I think.
It's hard not to
when
you have exactly. So Basically, on the side, I have a business called Gadget Software, and I build kind of web applications. Like, there's a couple of different verticals. One is web apps for SaaS companies. The other is business process automation for existing companies that want to save time and money of their employees by creating more automation pipelines for moving data from one place to another in their systems. So this is the kind of stuff that I do. So if you're interested, after listening to me talk about occultist type stuff for an hour, then I'd be happy to talk to you. You can reach out to me through the link in the description.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, that's all I really wanted to say. I'm sure that if you're interested after this conversation, we can also talk about occultist stuff if you want to. Yeah.
Sweet.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on. And,
yeah. Thanks for having me, guys.
Thank you.
Do you want to plug as usual, Justin?
Yeah, Justin Isis 93 Instagram
and DBLV Instagram.
Cool.
Sweet.
Right.
Thanks
Catch
for
you
listening.
guys.
Peace.